Hello and welcome to the second episode of this tutorial series. In this episode I'll show you how to create the code for the character setup we did last time. Select the HexaBuddy game object and under add component add a script which you're gonna call HexaBuddy script or something like that. The first thing we want to do inside of the code is importing a bunch of stuff. Now create a method called camera-to-player. Inside it, we want to move the camera to the head position. Now you want to create a camera variable. And a head variable as well. I'm going to create all the other body part variables as well because we'll need them later either way. Call the camera to player function inside the update method. Create another function which you want to call xrrig to player. In here, we want to set the xrrig's position to defender's position on the x-axis and to defender's position on the y-axis minus the half scale of defender plus the half scale of the monoball. And we want to set the xrig's position on the z-axis to defender's position on the z-axis. Create a variable for the xrrig. And call the newly created function inside the update method. Next off, create a rotate player method. Inside of it, we want to set the chess.transform.rotation to the player's head yaw. Create a head yaw variable of type quaternion. And create a getControllerInput variables function. Inside it, we want to set the head yaw to the camera's rotation on the y-axis. Call that newly created function inside the update method. And call the rotate player function inside fixed update. Now you can save all that and move all the corresponding game objects inside the script. So if we hit play now, you can see that we are already able to turn around and that the xrrig is following the player's position. Back inside the code, we want to create a function called spine contraction on real world crouch. Essentially what we're going to do inside here is setting the player's height to the real world height. We're going to achieve this by scaling defender to chest joint target position. Code-wise, we're going to achieve this by setting the joint's target on the y-axis to the camera controller position on the y-axis minus all the additional height contributors beside the joint itself, like you can see on the illustration. Furthermore, we want to clamp the target between 2 points, the lowest point achievable and the highest point achievable. What we're gonna do now is create a variable that holds our target position. And we want to create a camera controller. Of course, we also want to create a variable that holds our camera controller position. And we want to read the camera controller's position inside getController input values. After doing this, we want to create a variable for the additional height. And inside start, we want to load it. It's the half of the monoball plus the half of the fender scale plus the difference between the head position and the chest position. Now, of course, we also want to create a variable for the lowest and the highest point achievable. Back inside the method, you want to set the spine.targetPosition to our newly created target. The spine configurable joint will be the fender to chest joint. So also create a variable for the spine joint. If you did all this, we want to call the newly created function inside fixed update while we are not jumping. So of course you also want to create a variable for jumping. And make sure to initialize it with false. Now you can save all that. And back inside Unity, you want to create an empty game object under the camera offset from the XR rig. Call it camera controller. And under the camera controller, you want to add a XR action-based controller. Checkbox position action, and as a reference, use XRI HMD position. Check the checkbox for rotation action, and as a reference, you want to use XRI HDM rotation. Now you want to select the hexa body and shove the camera controller inside the hexa body script. Now you want to right-click the fender and open the properties of it. In here you want to search for the fender to chest joint. If you have found it, move the joint to the spine component of our hexa body script. For lowest crouch, you're going to want to use a value of 0.05. And for highest crouch, I'll use 180 because I'm not quite 180 height, but I still want to be able to stand on my toes. If you hit play now, you can see that you can stand up and sit down, and you're even capable of performing a little jump because of your body's inertia if you were out of your height boundaries. Now you want to jump back inside the code and make a debug.log which shows the highest crouch minus the additional height. Save all that and hit play. Now you can see some value in the console. Select the fender and search for the fender to chest joint. And set the linear limit of that joint to that particular value you can see in your console. Back inside the code, we want to delete that additional line we just made. And you're going to want to create a function called move and rotate hand. Inside here, you're going to want to set the right hand joint target position to the right hand controller position minus the camera controller position. And of course, do the same thing also for the left hand. So now we want to create a configurable joint for the right and the left hand. And of course, we want to create a variable for the right and the left controller. In addition, we also want to create two variables that hold the right and the left controller's position. Next up, inside the getController input values method, we want to read the right and the left hand's controller position. Back inside the method, we also want to set the right and left hand's target rotation. So of course we need two new variables that hold the controller's rotation. And inside the getController input values method, we want to read the rotation on both hands. Last but not least, we want to call the method inside fixed update. Great, now you can save all that, and back inside Unity, right-click the head and select Properties. Search for the right and the left hand joint and shove it inside our hexabody script. And if you hit play now, you can see that you're already able to move around your hands and to climb up stuff. So before I show you how to move around, we want to create the jump method. And for jumping, we need to sit down, and of course we need to stand up. So first of all, we want to create a jump sit down method. Essentially, inside here, we want to say, while our crouch target is higher than the point we want to crouch to, we want to reduce that crouch target by a certain speed. So of course you also want to create a variable for the speed. And of course we also want to create a jump sit up method. And inside it we want to set our crouch target to the highest crouch position minus the additional height. Next off, we want to create a jump method that implements both of the functions we just created. And first of all, we want to create an if statement that says if the left trackpad is actually pressed and it is pressed in the lower half. Next off, we want to create an input action reference for the left trackpad click. And we want to create a left trackpad pressed variable of type float. Inside getControllerInputValues, we want to read if the left trackpad is pressed. Now, of course, we also want to read where our left trackpad is actually touched. So, of course, you also want to create a left trackpad variable of type vector2. And inside getControllerInputValues, we want to read the left trackpad. Now, back inside the jump method, we want to say while the left trackpad is pressed in the lower area, we want to set jumping to true and execute the jump sit down method. If on the other hand the left trackpad is actually not pressed at all and the jumping is set to true, we want to set jumping to false and execute the jump sit up method. Last but not least, we want to execute the newly created jump method inside fixed update. Now you're gonna want to save all that. And back inside Unity, select the hexabody and for crouch speed, choose value of 1.5. For the left trackpad click, you want to select the XRI default action inputs. Select the XRI left hand and hit plus for creating a new input action. Name it left trackpad pressed. Now select bindings and click path. Under path, search for XR controller. I'll choose HTC Vive controller since I'm using HTC Vive. And in here, I'll choose the left controller, in which I'll select trackpad clicked. Set generic XR controller to true. And under action type, choose value. Under control type, choose any. Now you can close all that, and under the hexabody script, select left trackpad click, and in here search for left trackpad pressed. And if you hit play now, you can see that you're already able to jump. If you throw your hands in the air while doing so, you can even jump a little bit higher. If you're unhappy with the oscillation of the chest, you can increase the spring force of the fender to chest joint or increase the damping of it. So the last thing we want to do inside the code is creating a movement method. Since we are going to move around by rotating the monoball, the first thing we want to do is create a move monoball function. The first thing we want to do inside here is set freeze rotation to false. We also want to set the monoball's angular drag to angular drag on move. So of course you're going to want to create a angular drag on move variable of type float. Back inside move monoball, we want to add a torque to the monoball in a certain direction multiplied by a force we are feeding inside the method. So next thing we want to do is determine in which direction to move. So first of all, we'll create a method called move direction of type vector3. Inside getController input values, we want to set the move direction to the head yaw multiplied by the inputs we are getting from the right trackpad. So of course you're going to want to create a right trackpad variable of type vector2. And back inside getController input values, we want to read the right trackpad. Like shown on this illustration here, if we are rotating the monoball around the z-axis, we're actually making progress in the x direction. So we want to create a new variable, monoball torque, and flip the move direction values. So last but not least, you also want to create a monoball torque variable of type vector3. And that's it for the move monoball method. Next off, we want to create a stop monoball method. And inside it, we want to set the monoball's angular drag to a angular brake drag. So of course we want to create a variable for the angular brake drag. Furthermore, back inside stop monoball, we want to say if the monoball's velocity is equal to 0, we want to freeze its rotation. So next up we want to create a move player via controller method in which we'll call the move monoball and stop monoball function according to our wishes. So first of all we want to create two if statements if we are not jumping and if the right trackpad isn't touched. So of course we're gonna want to create an input action reference for the right trackpad touch. So of course you also want to create a right trackpad touched variable of type float. So now inside getController input values, we want to read if our right trackpad is touched. Back inside move player via controller, we want to say if we are not jumping and the right trackpad isn't touched at all, we want to execute the stop monoball method. Next off, we want to create an if statement that says if the right trackpad isn't pressed but it's touched, so of course we also want to create an input action reference for the right trackpad pressed. And of course you also want to create a right trackpad pressed variable. And inside get controller input values, of course we want to read if the right trackpad is pressed. Great, back inside move player via controller. If the right trackpad isn't pressed and the right trackpad is touched, we want to call the move monoball function and apply a walk force to it. So of course, you guessed it, we also want to create a move force walk variable of type float. And back inside the move player via controller method, we want to say if the right trackpad is pressed, we want to call the move monoball function and feed a sprint force in it. So of course you also want to create a move force sprint variable, also of type float. And back inside move player via controller, we want to say else if we're actually jumping and the right trackpad isn't touched, we want to stop the monoball. So, and if on the other hand the right trackpad is touched or pressed, we want to call the move monoball function and feed a crouch force into it. So of course we also have to create a move force crouch of type float. So, and the last thing we want to do inside the code here is calling the move player via controller function inside fixed update, and we're done for the code. Great, now you want to hop back inside Unity and select the hexa body. Inside the script, we want to choose for move force crouch a value of 5, for walk 10, for sprint 15. For the angular drag on move, we want to choose 5, and for the angular brake drag, we want to choose 50. Great, now for the input action references, we want to open the XRI default action inputs. Now select the right hand and create a new action input, which you want to call right trackpad pressed. Now under bindings, select path, XR controller, HTC Vive right hand, and trackpad clicked. Checkbox generic XR controller, and as action type choose value, and as control type any. Now you want to create a new input action, which you want to call right trackpad touched. Select bindings, and under path use the same path we used before, but now choose right trackpad touched. Checkbox generic XR controllers, and for action type use value, and for control type you want to use any. Now you can save all that, and back inside Unity we want to select the right trackpad pressed, and in here we want to search for right trackpad pressed. For the right trackpad touch, we want to do the same thing, but now we want to search for right trackpad touched. Perfect. And that's it for this tutorial. You might have noticed that the chair controller is a bit janky here and there, but I will definitely go into this in future episodes. If you're now curious how to have real physical arms, or how to grab stuff, or how to move in room scale, please subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the corresponding tutorial. Goodbye!